Let me show you a video. Trigger warning, it's of Margaret Thatcher.
Where there is discord, may we bring harmony. Where there is error, may we bring truth. Where there is doubt, may we bring faith. And where there is despair, may we bring hope.
This is Margaret Thatcher, about to enter 10 Downing Street for the first time as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom in May 1979. If you can hear it above the crowd, she's opted to quote from the so-called Prayer of Francis of Assisi, better known in its setting to music as the hymn Make Me a Channel of Your Peace. Also featured in the hit musical Come From Away. Thatcher opted not to mention the peace bit, which might be for the best. Because if there was one key event which held Thatcher's premiership in place, it wasn't peace, but war. Here's Margaret Thatcher on a tank. See, Thatcher's time in office didn't start off all that well. Her government was really keen to cut inflation, and in order to do so, chose to hike interest rates to an incredible 17%. This was a period where most Brits had variable rate mortgages, which meant that homeowners' monthly repayments briefly spiked in an incident of exceptionally brief hardship, which British uncles still talk about as though they were victims of some kind of war crime. The country fell into a recession, and the number of people out of work surpassed 3 million for the first time since the 1930s. Through all this, Thatcher's popularity cratered. Immediately after delivering that poem from Francis of Assisi, she'd boasted a net approval rating of +2. By the end of 1981, a year which had involved widespread rioting in Liverpool, Manchester and London, and the premiere of the less good musical Cats, that had dropped to -41. Then something happened which was to change all of that.
Argentinian scum!
On the morning of the 2nd of April 1982, 630 troops from the Argentine military landed on and swiftly wrested control of the Falkland Islands. The small archipelago in the South Atlantic had been under continuous British administration since the 1830s, although Argentina had long claimed the islands too. Argentina itself had been under a military dictatorship since 1976. And the government's campaign of violence against its own people had led to civil unrest. Argentina's leader, Galtieri, thus made the decision to seize the islands in an attempt to rally some support behind himself and his regime. The Argentinians hadn't expected Britain to respond, believing the islands to be too far away and too unimportant to be worth defending. Some of Thatcher's government felt similarly. She didn't. Thatcher dispatched a task force of 127 ships, including a nuclear submarine, to retake the islands. Over 74 days, the British armed forces fought to retake them. 255 British and 649 Argentine soldiers died before General Mario Menendez surrendered on the 14th of June. Galtieri, who had only initiated the invasion in pursuit of popularity, was removed from power, and the military dictatorship collapsed not long after. Thatcher, on the other hand, a poll carried out in June 1982 recorded an approval rate of +23, a jump of more than 50 percentage points from 18 months before. From being at risk of being ousted by her enemies within the Tory party, she went on to win 2 more elections and become the longest-serving Prime Minister in modern British history. War, it seems, can sometimes be pretty good for embattled politicians. Whatever drawbacks it might have in terms of casualties and cost, it can provide a means of drumming up support where previously little existed. On an unrelated note, Donald Trump keeps threatening to invade places.
My proudest legacy will be that of a peacemaker and unifier. That's what I want to be, a peacemaker and a unifier.
This is Donald Trump, delivering his second inaugural address in January 2025. Trump had talked about wanting to be a quote-unquote peacemaker a lot on the campaign trail.
I will prevent, and very easily, World War III, very easily.
He professed to be able to end the war in Ukraine in just 24 hours and humbly told voters in Michigan that he was the candidate of peace.
I am the candidate of peace. I am peace.
He actually says, "I am peace," which is a fantastic line. It's the Democrats, he told voters, who are the warmongers. He was the man who was going to end the so-called forever wars.
They said, he will start a war. I'm not going to start a war. I'm going to stop wars.
Immediately after getting into office, he set his heart on transforming this apparent love of peace into a Nobel Peace Prize, going on what can only be described as a for-your consideration campaign for the award, in which he repeatedly claimed to have ended 8 conflicts.
Everyone says that I should get the Nobel Peace Prize for each one of these achievements.
He was snubbed by the Academy.
No, I don't care about the Nobel Prize.
In the end, he had to settle for a FIFA Peace Prize at a weird ceremony which was a kind of Avengers Endgame for corruption. Unfortunately for him, Trump's second time in office didn't start well. Over the course of his first year back in power, the US was gripped by an affordability crisis in which, despite headline inflation rates remaining relatively low, Americans struggled with the high cost of housing, healthcare, energy, and eggs. His brutal attempts to address perceived illegal immigration through setting barely trained ICE agents loose on the streets of American cities was not the vote winner he thought it might be. All the while, the Epstein files, in which Trump definitely isn't massively implicated, constantly threatened to drop.
President Trump did nothing wrong. And what President Trump has always said is that he was from Palm Beach, and so was Jeffrey Epstein.
Trump managed to hold on to a positive approval level for less than 2 months before sentiment began to float ever downward. A year in, he turned a +2 net approval rate into -19. Which is presumably why he decided to try and do something to change all of that.
Good night. Happy New Year.
In September 2025, Donald Trump announced that he was renaming the US Department of Defense the Department of War, a return to the name that the department had held until 1947. It quickly became clear that he meant it. Or kind of. The period since has been witness to an avalanche of not quite warmongering by Trump and his allies. There were the airstrikes on apparent drug smuggling vessels in the Caribbean. There was the bombastic attack on Caracas and seizure of Nicolas Maduro. There was the announcement of the Donroe Doctrine and the intention to hold full control over what Marco Rubio called our hemisphere.
This is the Western Hemisphere, this is where we live, and we're not going to allow the Western Hemisphere to be a base of operation for adversaries, competitors, and rivals of the United States.
There were the follow-up threats to Cuba, Colombia, and Mexico.
Cuba looks like it's ready to fall.
Things really reached ahead with the will he, won't he hints at potentially seizing Greenland from Denmark, which is supposed to be an ally. Then when that turned out to be the equivalent of dropping a turd on the international stage, he turned his attention to Iran.
We're watching Iran. We're watching Iran. You know, we have a lot of ships going that direction, just in case.
And there's probably been at least one more thing since we filmed this. It's been a lot. Donald Trump's path from peacemaker to warmonger has not been the same as Margaret Thatcher's. Thatcher was, in a way, lucky. The Falklands happened to her. Trump, by contrast, has consistently been the instigator of his conflicts. Their needs in the moment of war, however, are not dissimilar. Here are 2 leaders elected on radical manifestos who nonetheless quickly found themselves deeply unpopular, even among many on their own side.
ICE, DHS, Kristi Noem have been a political disaster.
2 leaders in desperate need of something to change the narrative. 2 leaders wanting to unite their countries behind them. To say that Donald Trump might be using war, at least partly, as a means to achieve a similar turnaround in domestic support, however, seems kind of obvious. If you've not worked that one out for yourself already, there are plenty of commentators willing to tell you that. What I've become more and more interested in over the past few months, however, is the extent to which similar patterns appear to be repeating across the world. Across continents and across the political spectrum, we have found ourselves in a world of deeply unpopular leaders. Some of them have sought out war. Others decry it, but have nevertheless succumbed to the emergence of a world of rearmament and remobilization. Is a world of disliked and disconnected leaders marching us towards war? And maybe less importantly, will it actually serve to make any of them any more popular?
It marks the return of the RAF to nuclear deterrence for the first time in 3 decades, representing the biggest strengthening of our deterrence posture in a generation.
It's not just Trump. Rearmament and heightened military rhetoric is very much the theme of our age. There are, of course, the obvious examples. Vladimir Putin and Benjamin Netanyahu were among the earliest adopters of this new international logic in which might always equals right. Neither the invasion of Ukraine nor the genocide in Gaza were unprecedented. They both represented attempts to achieve long-standing national desires and settle long-standing national scores. What was different was the sheer scale of military force used to do so. This has required a complete reshaping of both countries' economies. Russia's military spending has increased by 126% since 2020. Spending on the military and police currently accounts for around 38% of total government spending. Israel's destruction of Gaza has involved similar shifts. The mobilization of reservists has led to regular labor shortages in peacetime industries, even as hefty salaries for those fighting has kept the economy looking pretty healthy.
Now it's turning to African countries to plug the gap. More than 200 farm workers left Malawi for Israel last month following a secret deal with the government.
Neither country has simply gone to war. They have, to an even greater extent than before, placed conflict at the core of their economies, diplomatic relationships, and national identities.
Regarding the new sanctions, first of all, there is nothing new here. Yes, they are of a serious nature for us, of course, this is understandable. And they will have certain consequences. But still, they will not significantly affect our economic well-being.
The region which I think is most revealing of the way the world is headed, however, is Western Europe. Surprise, I think the place where I live is the most interesting. Really lucky, really fortunate coincidence.
We are used to politicians with a sort of moral vision of taking us towards utopia, grounded on values which are either religious values or are straightforward traditional post-Marxist socialist values. Now that kind of vision politics is alien to Keir Starmer.
For all he likes to talk about mission-driven government, his government has lacked a unifying mission. Heck, I've made that argument on this very channel. You keep saying that your mission is growth, or sometimes national renewal, whatever that means, but that's a bit like saying that my business makes profit. Growth is an outcome. It's not a mission. And yet, amid all of this flip-flopping, there is a set of policies on which Starmer has remained steadfastly consistent. Keir Starmer is a Prime Minister of rearmament. More than anything else, his government has been one of preparing for war. The manifesto on which the Labour Party was elected back in 2024 included in it a pledge to set out the path to spending 2.5% of GDP on defence. Starmer has since promised to speed up his ambitions here, aiming to achieve this as soon as 2027. He's also said that that target should increase to 3% should the Labour Party win the next election. Simply incredible to not be able to believe in the prospect of world peace, but to be able to believe that the Labour Party is going to win the next election. The cash being diverted to the British Armed Forces at the moment is, according to the Prime Minister's office, the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the Cold War. Which might sound like just one policy announcement among many, but once you begin to notice it, you realise quite how central the military has become to everything the current UK government does. Want to boost economic growth outside of London? How about the armed forces? Want to create jobs? How about the armed forces? Want to develop alternative forms of training for young people who don't want to go to university? How about the armed forces? This last announcement was explicitly framed as a response to a call by the UK's Chief of the Defence Staff for a whole-of-society approach to defence.
To foster skills and opportunities for our young people, and foster a sense of national pride and purpose that has characterised our nation in times of conflict.
Kind of chilling. We're not just looking at isolated recruitment programs or purchases of military hardware here. We too are staring down a desire to recenter our entire economy and society around war.
We are moving to warfighting readiness as the central purpose of our armed forces.
This approach is echoing across Western European nations. Since 2023, EU leaders have regularly talked about needing to shift the continent into war economy mode. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz is currently on a mission to build the strongest conventional army in Europe, paid for with billions of euros worth of borrowing. France's new army chief of staff suggested in November that the country needed to be ready to lose its children.
L'accélération des périls commandent d'accélérer le réarmement de la France. Cela suppose que la nation consente à des efforts à la mesure de notre rude époque.
The motivations of Starmer, Merz and Macron are evidently not the same as those of Putin or Netanyahu or even Trump. Europe's rearmament has much more in common with Thatcher than with Galtieri. It is reactive. Even if military leaders are clearly motivated to say shocking things and to overstate various threats in order to convince politicians to buy them new toys, let's not pretend that there isn't some logic to this rearmament in an age of a belligerent Russia and a chaotic US.
All the United States is asking for is a place called Greenland.
And yet, I do think it's worth poking into the level of enthusiasm with which Starmer, Merz, Macron and other Western European leaders have thrown themselves into this real-life game of risk. Because there is something which all of these leaders do have in common with Trump and Netanyahu, if not Putin. All of the leaders who have been the most vocal about the need to be ready for war are also deeply unpopular.
Oh dear, you couldn't make this up. A new poll has revealed that Sir Keir Starmer is the least popular Prime Minister on record, and Rachel Reeves is the least popular Chancellor since their records began.
I need to start this section by showing you perhaps the worst video I've ever seen. And I have to watch my own loads of times.
Oh, gather round and lend me your ear. This is the tale of two-tier Keir.
This has nearly 1 million views.
Known across the land as the Granny Harmer, a soulless little man who betrayed the farmer. Hey!
Forget under 16s, I think you need to ban social media for the over 50s. It's again not just Keir Starmer or Donald Trump. We live in an age of unpopular leaders. Which sounds sensationalist or subjective. It sounds like I'm just telling you that I happen not to like many of today's world leaders, but it is a matter of record that over the past decade, the very act of being a politician in power has become something which makes politicians unpopular. This has been a massive turnaround. Throughout the relatively short history of popular democracy, it's generally been the case that one of the best things you can do if you want to win an election is to already hold the office that you're seeking. Unless you've really screwed things up, winning re-election has almost always been easier than being a challenger candidate. There's a name for this: the incumbency effect, named for the manner in which it favours the incumbent candidate. And you can see it in the results. Here in the UK, once a political party has won a single general election, they've tended to hold on for a few more. American presidents who stand for re-election have tended to be voted back in for another go at things. There are several potential explanations for this. Some of it is likely just down to voters simply being more familiar with the existing president, prime minister, or other representative. Particularly in elections for local representatives, a challenger candidate might literally just be a name that you've never heard before on a ballot paper. You might have no idea who they are. An existing MP or congressperson, however, is more likely to be a fully fleshed out person that you've seen on TV or at events with a face, a family, pets, a personality.
This time he's the lesser of two evils.
More than this, you've probably seen a candidate seeking re-election on TV or at an event in their capacity as that elected official. Everything a politician does in their job is basically a campaign ad for the next election. They're in the White House or on an aircraft carrier or at the UN. If part of deciding who to vote for is considering whether a candidate could fulfill the basic requirements of the job, we don't have to do as much considering for an incumbent. We've already seen them doing it. And it has generally been the case in the past that people have found that reassuring.
To protect our rights, to make sure that everyone in this country is treated equally and that everyone is given a fair shot at making it.
Finally, being in office comes with a whole load of time that you can use for promoting yourself, and perhaps more crucially in countries like the US, where money plays an outsized role in politics, fundraise. Someone who is running for office while working another job isn't going to be able to spend as much time campaigning and speaking with donors as someone whose life is dedicated to politics. The size of the incumbency advantage can vary wildly across constituencies, districts, time, and parties, from as little as a few percentage points to as much as 15%. It's largely for this reason that political parties can be willing to field, frankly, ancient candidates when that seems farcical.
In 1948, 2/3 of Americans said America and Western European friends should join together.
Over the past few years, however, cracks have begun to show in this once ironclad rule of politics. 2024 was a pretty big year for elections, the biggest ever in human history. Half the world's population had the opportunity to vote across 72 countries. And the result was an absolute drubbing for incumbents. Donald Trump's defeat of Kamala Harris marks the third time in a row that America's incumbent party had lost the presidency. The UK's Conservative Party experienced its worst defeat since 1832. Emmanuel Macron called a snap election only for his ensemble coalition to lose almost a third of its seats amid a squeeze from right and left.
It reminds you of that quote from Charles de Gaulle, how can anyone govern a country with 246 different types of cheese?
Japan's all-powerful Liberal Democratic Party suffered the second worst results in its history and was forced to form a minority coalition. The African National Congress, which similarly has governed South Africa consistently since the end of apartheid, lost its majority for the first time in decades and also had to form a coalition. Modi's multi-party National Democracy Alliance was also pushed into a coalition where they'd previously governed independently. Each leader's defeat was presaged by particular local events, scandals, and trends. And yet, the overall takeaway from that year of elections was clear. Being in power has itself become unpopular. We have, as the meme would have it, become ungovernable. Perhaps the weirdest aspect of all of this is that the various quirks present in many of these countries' electoral systems means that many leaders who have lost ground recently have still managed to cling on to power. Emmanuel Macron is still the president of France, despite having a net approval of -63.
How can anyone govern a country with 246 different types of cheese?
Elsewhere, politicians who have won have quickly become unpopular, partly because they happened to win. Donald Trump and Keir Starmer are just the most obvious examples here. Elsewhere across Europe, a 2025 YouGov poll found that Germany's Merz, Italy's Meloni, Spain's Sanchez, and Denmark's Friedrichsen to all have net negative approval ratings. In an age of rage, it's easy to be swept into power in anti-establishment anger, but as soon as you cross the threshold of the seat of power, you'd better be ready for that anger to turn on you. The question which remains then is whether this widespread current propensity for us to turn on our leaders is making them more likely to take us to war.
We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on beaches, landing grounds, in fields, in streets, and on the hills.
Academics refer to the idea that politicians might sometimes use foreign wars to distract from domestic failures as the diversionary theory of war. To quote Jaroslav Tier, this posits that, under conditions such as economic adversity or political unrest, the country's leader may attempt to generate a foreign policy crisis in order both to divert domestic discontent and bolster their political fortunes through a rally around the flag effect. The rally around the flag effect here refers to the theory that, in times of external conflict, citizens tend to embrace an in-group, out-group mindset. The result is that internal divisions between different social groups within a country fade, as people turn their ire towards the enemy instead. In this formulation then, the diversionary theory of war posits that an unpopular leader might start a conflict in order to co-opt those effects and to break down any division between themselves and the people that they govern, thereby boosting their popularity.
I'm doing my part.
What's interesting is that academic studies around diversionary uses of war tend to raise more questions than they answer. At the most basic level, there's a massive question mark over how successful diversionary wars or military action is at actually shoring up support from popular leaders. For every Margaret Thatcher, there's a Galtieri. For every Putin, there's a George W. Bush or Tony Blair, both of whose popularities were ultimately harmed, not helped by the Iraq War.
When you arrive into a situation like this, a live television interview, and you come through the gates and you have people chanting, with the placards and so on, and they're shouting war criminal, and they're shouting at you. Are you a war criminal?
Of course I don't believe that. But
Why,
I mean,
why are they calling you one?
Ryan, you know why they are, and
No,
they're
no,
perfectly
explain-
entitled. Look, I'm
explain
not
it.
going to explain it. I don't have to explain it. They can explain it.
Other scholars have questioned how common uses of the tactic actually are, crunching huge piles of data to try and assess whether there is a statistical relationship between civil unrest within a country and the likelihood that that country ends up going to war. Most enlightening for any discussion of today's shift towards rearmament, however, is this paper by Kyle Haynes, published in 2015. Haynes argues that diversionary military action is very much a tactic which unpopular leaders use in pursuit of a turnaround in public affections. And yet, rather than a rally around the flag approach, he suggests that the real motivation is often a desire on the part of failing leaders to perform competence. This makes more and more sense the more you think about it. For one, extremely unpopular leaders usually aren't viewed as merely evil. Real unpopularity only comes with the stench of incompetence. Thatcher and Gualtieri both received plenty of criticism for how they treated their own citizens, but it was a sense that they just weren't very good at their jobs, which was the real killer. Controversial actions might deepen the extent to which existing opponents dislike a leader, but it's being viewed as incompetent, which risks losing the backing of your most loyal supporters. Looking across today's unpopular premiers, it's clear that a lot separates them. There is a clear blue water between the politics of Keir Starmer and that of Donald Trump. More than anything, one has actively sought to start conflict, where the other's military maneuvering has been more responsive. What unites them is a complete inability not to step on rakes. Trump almost talked his way into having to release Epstein files, in which, again, he's clearly not implicated at all. Then he began subjecting the country to his ice goons, who, more than just evil and violent, are also completely inept. Starmer's reverse Midas touch is such that he has the ability to take extremely popular policies, announce them, and somehow make them unpopular. And yet, war comes heaped with connotations of competence. Competence and war are often seen to go hand in hand in our culture. Take Barack Obama. If I were to ask you to think of the two most iconic moments of Barack Obama's presidency, it's highly likely you'll either land on this photo or this moment.
Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda.
Once upon a time, the Affordable Care Act might have also loomed large, or Georgia behind the camera is dead set on the tanned suit being the most iconic moment. But it's the military action which is really stuck across the whole culture. Which is real Fox News energy to that. Being like, I remember the terror. War is often what we think that leaders do. There's a phrase which gets thrown around in British politics a lot, that the first duty of government is the defence of the realm. Which, let's be honest, pretty cringe. You're not King Arthur, you did PPE at Oxford. But it underlines a cultural trope in which we are minded to think of a leader as being more of a leader if they lead through a conflict. And that trope is, in many regards, just as dangerous to the world at the moment as the more bombastic adventures of Donald Trump.
Let's be clear-eyed about where this leads. A world of fortresses will be poorer, more fragile, and less sustainable.
This is Mark Carney, delivering his special address to the World Economic Forum in Davos this January. The speech mourned the arrival of an era in which great powers seek to get their own way through military might, and stressed the role that so-called middle powers might play in this new world order.
Middle powers must act together because if we're not at the table, we're on the menu.
We could talk for days about how the domestic performance of Donald Trump is or isn't guiding his foreign military adventures, and yet, to my mind, it's at the level of these middle powers, well, at least not superpowers, where the conversation about unpopular leaders and war becomes most interesting. Which, again, probably not uninfluenced by the fact that I live in the UK. Carney also took a moment to talk about his government's plans to throw money at the military and place rearmament at the heart of the economy.
We're doubling our defense spending by the end of this decade, and we're doing so in ways that build our domestic industries.
Nevertheless, Carney is unique among the leaders that we've talked about in today's video in that he actually is pretty popular. He's consistently had a net positive approval during his time in office so far, with his Davos speech boosting it as high as 26%, which at our present juncture is just wildly popular. As we've seen, across other G7 and middle power countries, political leaders have become systematically unloved. And facing such unpopularity, it's no surprise that they might turn to grandstanding on the international stage. One of the least derogatory nicknames that Keir Starmer has gained over his first 2 years in power is Never Hear Keir, a reference to the fact that he always seems to be off on a jaunt somewhere. Ukraine, the G20, the US, but can you blame him? Like, everything he touches in the UK seems to turn to shit. Other politicians want to take on his leadership, and his popularity only seems to fall and fall. On a level of sheer mental self-preservation, I would also prefer to just go and hang out with Macron and Merz and talk about Ukraine. As the example of Ukraine shows, there are logical reasons for some of the shifts towards militarism. An expansionist Russia, an expansionist US, and an unpredictable China. Yet, that doesn't always mean that the responses are commensurate with the threat. I mentioned in my recent video about nuclear warfare, the UK's plan to acquire a bunch of F-35A fighter jets capable of carrying tactical nuclear bombs, a move with no upsides and the downside of having the potential for encouraging nuclear escalation. We're about to spend almost £1 billion on these things, and I don't think it's ridiculous to suggest that at least part of that decision is rooted in a personal effort by this guy and those around him to not look like such a nerd. Whatever actual reasons for arming up might exist, a pandemic of unpopularity among our leaders risks exacerbating an already strained scenario. It is, for what it's worth, unlikely to work. There's only so long that you can tell people that there's no money to build houses or hospitals while splashing out on fighter jets for a war which might not come. And one risk is that it only leads us into a cycle where unpopularity pushes us closer and closer to the brink. The theory that embattled leaders might jump into military endeavours has always been something which has long been on the minds of North Korea watchers. The fear is always that should the regime ever come under threat, they might just fire their nuclear arsenal at Washington or somewhere. If you want to find out a little bit more about the founding of North Korea, then I can only recommend going and checking out Mad Kings, a new series by the team behind Real Life Law, which looks at the lives of various despots and dictators. From Muammar Gaddafi and his all-female bodyguard unit to Kim Il-sung, who remained North Korea's eternal president despite having died all the way back in 1994. Who knows, maybe there'll be a Donald Trump episode on that list at some point in the future. But Nebula has more than just despots and tyrants. I'm currently enjoying Tara Mooney's fascinating Nebula-exclusive series Politics, which explores the politicization of boobs throughout history, including in our new post-woke era. Politics is a really fantastic example of why Nebula is so great for both audiences and creators. If Tara had made Politics for YouTube, I think we all know the likelihood of it actually turning up in anyone's recommendations feeds. Nebula gives us the freedom to make stuff for you without having to worry about either recommendation or monetization algorithms hiding it away. More than that, in an era where YouTube has become more and more clickbaity, our goal with Nebula is to make a genuinely prestige, premium experience where you can sit back on your sofa, whack some stuff up on the TV, and actually find something high quality and enriching to watch without wasting millions of hours scrolling through slop. All of us involved in creating Nebula are viewers as well as creators, and we want it to be a really high quality experience. If you sign up to Nebula using my link go.nebula.tv/Tom Nicholas, you'll get 50% off an annual plan, bringing the price down to just $2.50 per month, which is an absolute steal. Alongside being a fantastic package of stuff to watch, signing up to Nebula using my link go.nebula.tv/Tom Nicholas really helps to support my work at a time when making videos for the internet is becoming harder and harder. Not only do we get paid more every time someone watches our videos on Nebula rather than on YouTube, I also get a little kickback when you sign up, which makes a huge difference in keeping things ticking over. That link again is go.nebula.tv/Tom Nicholas. Thanks so much for watching once again, and I will see you over on Nebula.
All that's left for me to do is to say a massive thank you to my top tier supporters over on Patreon at patreon.com/Tom Nicholas, who are Richard, Gary, Dick on Spain, Bill Mitchell, ZC Reese, Zoe Alden, Alexander Blank, Neil Zabildgaard, Sophia R, Sergio Suarez, Richard Rapoon, Gabriel Koch, Fiasco Linguini, Agent Maxwell, Glenn Sugden, Emil, Jarabar, Yillamson, Paulius Edicus, Sam Fortunato, Sondre Yarsenjean, Douglas Urquhart, Ahmed Harachik, and Hasty. If you want to join them in getting early access to the videos, copies of scripts to them, access to my weekly blog where I tell you what we're up to, and a bunch of other stuff, you can find out how to do so at patreon.com/Tom Nicholas. Thanks so much for watching once again, and I'll see you in the next video.